Stop resisting.
I am not resisting. Senior Chief Kendra Blaze.
Stay down. We're verifying your status.
All units stand down. That is a senior naval intelligence officer. Repeat, stand down.
He saw a black woman in a Navy dress uniform moving through Hartsfield Regional Airport, and he made a decision. Not a considered one, not a difficult one, a fast one, the kind that forms before the mind has time to ask whether it should. He raised one hand and blocked her path. She stopped, hands visible, carry-on already lowered to the floor. Every metal on her chest catching the overhead terminal light. She had answered every question, produced every document, stated her rank, her station, her orders. Twice, none of it moved him. What Senior Chief Petty Officer Kendra Blaze did not know, and what the officer would spend the rest of his career trying to forget, was that the next 11 minutes were already being recorded by 7 different phones, and that before midnight, 8 million people would watch what happened next. Before we continue, drop your city or country in the comments. We want to know where you are watching from. If you believe a 23-year career and 4 overseas deployments earn more than a knee on the back in a public terminal, hit the like button and subscribe. Every story we tell here is built on that belief. Kendra Blaze was 41 years old and had given 23 of those years to the United States Navy. She had not given them easily or abstractly. She had given them across 4 deployments, 2 combat theaters, and a body of work that ended with 3 decorations mounted on the left side of her chest: the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal, the Navy Commendation Medal, and the Meritorious Service Medal, each one earned, none of them decorative. She had enlisted at 18 out of a single determination that had been forming since she was old enough to understand what sacrifice meant. On the morning she signed her enlistment papers, she did it without ceremony and without doubt. On the afternoon she walked into Hartsfield Regional Airport in full dress uniform. She was 78 minutes from a classified briefing. She had no reason to expect trouble. She had given this country everything it had asked of her. The checkpoint was busy. Gate C at Hartsfield Regional Airport processed hundreds of travelers on a Tuesday afternoon without incident. The same as every afternoon. Lines moving, bins stacking, the flat mechanical rhythm of people reducing themselves to their contents and passing through. Nobody expected disruption. Nobody anticipated the line stopping entirely and staying stopped for the better part of 20 minutes, while a Senior Chief Petty Officer in full dress uniform stood at the center of it. The lead security officer's name was Conrad Hale. He had worked the checkpoint for 4 years and had developed in that time the particular certainty of a man whose authority had never been seriously challenged. He was not a violent person. He was not, by his own accounting, a prejudiced one. He was simply a man who had learned to read a room quickly and act on what he read. He read Kendra Blaze the moment she entered his line. He stepped into her path with one hand raised. She stopped, carry-on bag lowered to the floor, both hands at her sides, visible. She had done nothing wrong, and she behaved like someone who knew it, calm, upright, unhurried. The medals on her chest caught the terminal light. Hale looked at them and looked at her, and the decision he had already made did not change. He told her the documents looked fake. He told her the formatting was off. He told her the signature was suspicious. He said he had seen fakes before, and he knew what he was looking at. Then he told her to stop moving, or things would get considerably worse. Kendra Blaze did not move. She did not argue. She answered the first question he asked, then the second, with the measured precision of someone accustomed to being clear the first time. She produced her military identification card. She produced her travel orders on Naval Station Norfolk letterhead, official, current, and signed by the correct authority. She stated her rank, her service number, and her destination. Hale held the documents and turned them over with theatrical care. A second officer joined him. They muttered between themselves about the formatting, about the font, about the signature's angle. The line behind Kendra Blaze stopped moving. Travelers slowed, then halted. Phones appeared. Not all at once, but steadily, the way attention gathers around something that is clearly wrong. Backup arrived in under 2 minutes. A third officer took a position to her left. A fourth appeared behind the checkpoint scanner. The perimeter was loose, but unmistakable. 4 uniformed security personnel arranged around a single woman who had not raised her voice, had not moved, had not done anything except produce exactly what she had been asked to produce. Kendra Blaze noted her flight time. 70 minutes. She stated it without urgency. She stated that every document she had provided was authentic. She stated it clearly, the way she had learned to communicate under pressure, not to persuade, but to establish record. Hale called her tone and attitude problem. He radioed for a floor supervisor. The crowd continued to grow. The phones continued to record. The space around her contracted until she stood pressed between the cold metal of the checkpoint scanner and 4 people who had collectively decided, on the basis of no evidence, that she was a threat. She stood inside that contracting space with her hands at her sides and her eyes forward and her breathing steady. The breathing of a woman who had stood in worse positions in worse places and held the same line. When the floor supervisor did not appear quickly enough, Hale moved first. He placed a hand on Kendra Blaze's shoulder and ordered her to step aside. She stated quietly that she did not consent to being touched without cause. That was enough. 2 officers seized her arms. Her uniform jacket twisted at the shoulders. The motion was fast, and the result was immediate. She went down face first onto the checkpoint floor, and the knee that pressed into the small of her back was not gentle. Her metal struck the tile with a sound that carried through the surrounding silence. At least 5 phones were recording in high definition by the time she was fully down. She did not resist. She did not shout. She breathed the controlled 4-count breath she had learned in training and practiced in combat and relied on in every moment when panic would have cost her something she could not afford to lose. The knee stayed on her back. Hale spoke into his radio requesting additional personnel. The terminal made its overhead announcements. The conveyor belt behind the scanner ran empty. The checkpoint fell quiet. Backup arrived in under 2 minutes. A 3rd officer took a position to her left. A 4th appeared behind the checkpoint scanner. The perimeter was loose but unmistakable. 4 uniformed security personnel arranged around a single woman who had not raised her voice, had not moved, had not done anything except produce exactly what she had been asked to produce. Kendra Blaze noted her flight time. 70 minutes. She stated it without urgency. She stated that every document she had provided was authentic. She stated it clearly, the way she had learned to communicate under pressure, not to persuade, but to establish record. Hale called her tone an attitude problem. He radioed for a floor supervisor. The crowd continued to grow. The phones continued to record. The space around her contracted until she stood pressed between the cold metal of the checkpoint scanner and 4 people who had collectively decided, on the basis of no evidence, that she was a threat. She stood inside that contracting space with her hands at her sides and her eyes forward and her breathing steady. The breathing of a woman who had stood in worse positions in worse places and held the same line. When the floor supervisor did not appear quickly enough, Hale moved first. He placed a hand on Kendra Blaze's shoulder and ordered her to step aside. She stated quietly that she did not consent to being touched without cause. That was enough. 2 officers seized her arms. Her uniform jacket twisted at the shoulders. The motion was fast, and the result was immediate. She went down face first onto the checkpoint floor, and the knee that pressed into the small of her back was not gentle. Her metal struck the tile with a sound that carried through the surrounding silence. At least 5 phones were recording in high definition by the time she was fully down. She did not resist. She did not shout. She breathed the controlled 4-count breath she had learned in training and practiced in combat and relied on in every moment when panic would have cost her something she could not afford to lose. The knee stayed on her back. Hale spoke into his radio requesting additional personnel. The terminal made its overhead announcements. The conveyor belt behind the scanner ran empty. The checkpoint fell quiet. Not the quiet of resolution, the quiet of suspension. The quiet of a crowd that has witnessed something it does not yet have words for. Travelers stood in a wide arc at a respectful and uncertain distance. No one intervened. No one turned away. The phones kept recording. Kendra Blaze lay motionless on the floor of Gate C, with her uniform still perfectly regulation, her cover knocked slightly to one side, her decorations scattered against the tile. Her eyes were open and fixed forward. She was not looking at anything in the terminal. She was looking at the same point she had looked at on every deployment, when endurance was the only tactic left. The overhead lights were harsh and flat. The boots surrounding her were still. She had survived Bahrain in summer heat that bent the air above the tarmac. She had survived a 12-hour emergency at sea that cost 2 crew members their hearing. She had survived 23 years of the particular exhaustion that comes with being excellent in a system that does not always welcome it. She would survive this too. But the phones were still recording. And the image they were capturing, a senior chief petty officer in full dress uniform, pinned to the floor of an American airport, medals against the tile, surrounded by the boots of people who had decided she did not belong, was already on its way to 8 million people. The story had not started. It had only arrived. The footage was already moving. 3 phones had been recording for the first 4 minutes, then 5, then 7. The angle varied. One from behind the conveyor belt, one from the far left side of the checkpoint, one nearly overhead from a traveler who had stopped on the upper concourse walkway and was looking down at the scene below. All 3 captured the same thing. A woman in full navy dress uniform, face against the tile, a knee in her back, hands empty at her sides, surrounded by 4 airport security personnel who were still talking to each other rather than to her. The crowd had not dispersed. It had grown. People who had already cleared the checkpoint and were moving toward their gates had stopped walking. They stood in clusters, phones out, watching. Some had already seen the decorations. Others were learning them now, reading the chest of a woman on the floor, parsing the configuration of a uniform they had not been trained to read but somehow understood as serious. The Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal. The Navy Commendation Medal. And above them both, mounted at the highest position on the rack, the Meritorious Service Medal, awarded not for time served but for sustained, distinguished performance above what the position required. The kind of decoration that does not come easily. The kind that must be argued for up the chain. Conrad Hale was still holding the travel orders. He had been holding them for 11 minutes. He had turned them over 4 times. He had pointed at the signature twice and the header once, and had said nothing conclusive about either. The second officer standing beside him had offered no better analysis. They had simply continued to hold the documents and stand inside their certainty, and the certainty had not moved even as the crowd pressed closer and the phones kept recording. The floor supervisor arrived 9 minutes after Hale's radio call. He was a compact man in his mid-50s who moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who had managed airport disruptions for a long time and had never once considered that the disruption might be his team's fault. He arrived at the edge of the perimeter, took in the scene, and directed his first question at Hale. He asked what the problem was. Hale told him the documents appeared fraudulent. The supervisor nodded and looked at the documents and asked Hale if he had run the verification protocol. Hale said he was waiting on it. The supervisor told Kendra Blaze to remain on the floor until verification came through. He did not address her by name. He did not address her by rank. He addressed her the way a man addresses an object that has complicated his afternoon. 20 minutes passed on the terminal clocks. The line behind the checkpoint had been closed and rerouted. A secondary lane was processing travelers, while the primary checkpoint remained frozen around one motionless woman. Her flight was now 60 minutes from departure. Additional security personnel had arrived to reinforce the perimeter. 2 more officers who knew nothing about what had happened and took their positions based solely on the fact that their colleagues were already standing there. The crowd was enormous now. It had pulled in travelers from 3 adjacent gates. A group near the far barrier had their phones raised in a continuous, unbroken line, recording without commentary, watching in the particular silence of people who are witnessing something they do not know how to stop. The security officers continued to discuss Kendra Blaze's case above her, as though she were not present. They spoke about the documents. They spoke about the verification delay. One of them asked whether the uniform could have been purchased online. Another said he had heard about cases like this. None of them looked down at her. She heard every word. Her breathing stayed measured. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The discipline of it was not dramatic. It was mechanical, practiced to the point of reflex through 4 deployments and however many mornings in between when the alternative to control was something she could not afford. The weight on her back was real. The cold of the tile was real. The humiliation was real in a way that went beyond the physical. It was the particular weight of a country declining to recognize itself in you, even when you are wearing its uniform. She did not move. She did not speak. She waited. The senior operations supervisor was not supposed to be at Gate C. He had come through the checkpoint on a staffing matter, a scheduling conflict in the secondary screening area that required his signature before end of shift. He was cutting through the checkpoint concourse when he saw the crowd. He slowed. He looked, and then he saw the medals. He had served in the United States Navy for 14 years before taking the airport operations role. He had earned one of the decorations on her chest himself. He recognized the Meritorious Service Medal the way a person recognizes something they worked for, not by recalling information, but by something that moves in the body before the mind has finished processing. He walked into the circle. He told every officer to remove their hands and step back. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. The weight behind it was the weight of someone who understood exactly what was on that floor and exactly what it meant that it was there. The knee came up. The hands withdrew. Kendra Blaze was helped to her feet. She straightened her cover. She adjusted the front of her jacket, smoothed the fabric at her shoulders, and set her decorations back to alignment with 2 careful adjustments. Then she stood at attention. The supervisor looked at her for a moment before he spoke. Then he took his radio and transmitted a single message to higher command. The detained individual was Senior Chief Petty Officer Kendra Blaze, 23 years of service, en route to a time-sensitive classified briefing at Naval Station Norfolk. The response came back in under 90 seconds. It was not what anyone at Gate C had expected. Before we continue, do you think a decorated service member with 23 years and 4 deployments should ever be treated this way in her own country? Drop respect in the comments if you believe the uniform deserves better. Drop change if you think this kind of profiling must end today. Share this with one person who needs to see what real service looks like. The supervisor walked Kendra Blaze off the concourse and into a private holding room adjacent to the checkpoint corridor. It was a functional room, a table, 4 chairs, a water cooler against the far wall. He filled a cup and set it in front of her without ceremony. She sat down. She drank. He placed a notepad on the table and told her he needed her statement in full, everything from the moment she entered the checkpoint line. He told her the security team was being separated and isolated. He told her no one would enter the room without her consent. She gave her statement without emotion and without omission. She stated times, sequences, and exact language. She had the memory of someone trained to record accurately under pressure and the composure of someone who had decided, before she ever sat down, that the statement she gave in this room was going to matter. When she finished, the supervisor set down his pen. She looked at him across the table, steady, uniform realigned, hands folded in front of her, and told him that what had happened in that checkpoint was not about her. It was about every service member who had ever stood in a similar line without 23 years behind them, without medals on their chest, without a veteran supervisor happening to walk through at the right moment. It was about the ones no one had helped up. The supervisor did not respond immediately. He wrote something on the notepad, then looked back at her. Outside the room, the checkpoint footage was 47 seconds long. It had already left the airport. The story had not peaked. It had not even reached its full size yet. The response from military command arrived in under 90 seconds, and it did not ask for clarification. It issued a directive. Air traffic control at Hartsfield Regional Airport received the order from the Department of Defense at 14 minutes past 3 in the afternoon. The language was unambiguous. All departures and arrivals were suspended immediately, indefinitely, pending the secure extraction of a classified traveler whose operational security had been compromised. Planes already cleared for takeoff were held at the gate. 2 aircraft already in the air and on approach were redirected to alternate facilities. The control tower executed the order without delay and without a full understanding of why, which was, in part, the point. The airport froze, not the quiet procedural freeze of a weather delay. The hard stop of a facility brought to a standstill by an authority that sat well above its own operational structure. Terminals backed up within minutes. Departure boards went blank across the eastern concourse. The passenger announcement system offered only that all flights were experiencing an operational hold and that further updates would follow. No timeline. No cause. No assurance. Thousands of travelers stopped moving and pulled out their phones. Some of them were already watching the video. The footage was 43 seconds long. It had been shot from a slight elevation, the upper concourse walkway, which meant the camera caught both the floor and the faces of the officers standing over her. The medals were clearly visible throughout. The knee was clearly visible. The moment the veteran supervisor walked through the perimeter, ordered the officers back, and helped her to her feet, that was clearly visible too. The entire sequence, beginning to end, in 43 seconds. It reached 1 million views before the airport's departure boards went dark. It reached 4 million before the first national news desk called the airport authority for comment. By midnight, it had 8 million views across 3 platforms, and the number was still climbing. Naval Station Norfolk released its official statement at 6:47 in the evening. The statement confirmed Senior Chief Petty Officer Kendra Blaze's rank, her 23 years of active service, her 4 deployments, and the full legitimacy of every decoration mounted on her chest. It confirmed that her travel orders had been issued by proper authority on official Naval Station letterhead. It confirmed that she had been traveling under classified orders to a time-sensitive intelligence briefing. The statement did not elaborate on the nature of the briefing. It did not need to. The airport authority had no equivalent statement ready. Its communications director released 3 sentences acknowledging the incident and promising a review. The review language was standard. The situation was not. Conrad Hale and the officers who had formed the perimeter around Kendra Blaze were terminated before the evening news cycle finished its first broadcast. Their union issued a protest the following morning, calling the terminations premature. The protest generated a secondary news cycle that was uniformly unfavorable. 2 members of the House Armed Services Committee announced a formal congressional inquiry by 9 o'clock the next morning, calling the incident a national disgrace and demanding testimony from both the Airport Authority and the Department of Defense. Lawsuits were filed within 10 days. The attorneys who filed them did not lack for evidence. The Department of Defense confirmation came 4 days after the incident, and it clarified something the Airport Authority had not understood and the public had not known. The airspace shutdown had not been symbolic. Kendra Blaze was not merely a decorated service member traveling to a routine briefing. She was a senior naval intelligence officer moving under classified orders to a time-sensitive operation whose details remained sealed. When the bystander footage circulated publicly within the first hour, it did not simply embarrass the airport. It compromised an operational movement. Her face, her rank, her destination, her travel window, all of it broadcast to 8 million people before the Department of Defense could contain the exposure. The 6-hour airspace shutdown was a containment protocol. While Hartsfield Regional sat frozen, Kendra Blaze was moved through a secondary facility on an alternate transport. The briefing she had been en route to was delayed, but not canceled. The operation it served was restructured around the exposure. The people responsible for that restructuring worked through the night. Conrad Hale had stopped a woman at a checkpoint because something about her did not fit the picture in his head of who was supposed to be there. He had been wrong about the documents. He had been wrong about the uniform. He had been wrong about the rank, the decorations, the service record, and the cooperative response she had given him from the moment he raised his hand. He had also, without knowing it, triggered a Department of Defense containment operation. The security officers who had placed a knee on the back of Senior Chief Petty Officer Kendra Blaze had done so to a woman whose security clearance sat at a level that could halt civilian air travel across an entire metropolitan region. They had not known. They had not asked. They had looked at her and decided, in under 4 seconds, on no evidence, that she did not belong. That decision had consequences that were still being calculated weeks later. She gave one television interview. She wore the same dress uniform. The medals were back in position, precise, regulation, correctly mounted. She sat with her hands folded on the table in front of her and answered every question with the same measured clarity she had used at the checkpoint, in the holding room, and in every room before that where she had been required to explain herself to someone who had already decided what she was. The interviewer asked her how she felt about what had happened. She said she felt that the incident was not about her. She said it was about every service member who had ever stood in a similar checkpoint without 23 years of service behind them, without medals on their chest, without a veteran supervisor walking through at the right moment, without 7 phones recording, without the Naval Station Norfolk press office releasing a statement by evening, without a congressional inquiry announced by morning. She said the ones who had none of those things, the ones no one helped up, were the reason the story needed to be told all the way through. The interviewer did not follow up. There was nothing to add. The broadcast ended on the image of Kendra Blaze sitting upright in that uniform, hands folded, expression steady. Behind her, through the studio window, the Atlanta skyline held the last color of a late afternoon. The runways at Hartsfield Regional were operational again. The planes were moving. The departure boards were lit. Everything had resumed. Everything, except the question she had left in the room. Not the question of what happened to her. That question had been answered. The officers were gone. The inquiry had opened. The lawsuits were filed and moving through a system designed, in theory, to produce accountability. The question she left was older than any of that. It was the question of the service member with no medals and no cameras, and no supervisor, who happened to know what a meritorious service medal looked like. The one who had stood in the same line, answered the same questions, produced the same documents, and stayed on the floor. Kendra Blaze had not invented that question. She had only made it impossible for a moment to look away from.